Sorry, I'll be right with you. Was just wrapping up a phone call. Yeah, I know. I just saw the document. Yay. I just opened it and started reading it, actually. But hold on just a minute. Um, yeah. Sorry. I can't go on camera right now. I have a problem with some medicine. I can't get my arthritis medicine. Uh, so it's been a fucking great day, everybody. Yay! But I'm going to let this go on. It's teed up and we'll start shortly and then I'll come back on when I pull my shit together. But yeah. Hopefully that'll be. No, I'm going to do it. Cuz there's nothing I can do. I just got off the phone. I have to do a lot of phone calling.
By the
Recording in
Republican
progress.
right and the
Hold
right
on.
religious right. We have a wonderful panel here. Our topic today, before I introduce them, is discussing the latest iteration in this kind of long-running assault on women by the Republicans and their dark money court-packing allies on the religious right. Since Dobbs, a wave of toxic masculinity has been unleashed on courts and in legislatures, from draconian bans on abortion to threats to criminalize women and doctors afraid to treat women in desperate need. This wave is also evident in policy planning for the Trump administration in Project 2025, which is a profound assault on women's economic and bodily freedom throughout. It's also evident in politics and culture and what is acceptable in speech and political discourse and ideas. For example, J.D. Vance, vice presidential candidate, has been openly suggesting that childless people be taxed at higher rates and that childless women specifically are either mentally ill or depressed and are unworthy, perhaps, of even having the vote. The Trump campaign spokespeople include the likes of Jason Miller, a man credibly accused of slipping a girlfriend and abortifacient in a smoothie, who recently proclaimed on TV that states should have the right to track pregnancies and forbid out-of-state travel for abortions. So nobody would disagree that these are pretty dark times for women and girls and their allies in America, and by some metrics, across the world. It's a backlash against women's gains in economic and bodily independence. Steroids. So our panel is here today to discuss various aspects of this: legal, cultural, political, and global. I'd like to introduce them now. Alex Aronson, wave. Alex is a lawyer, organizer, Court Accountability's co-founder and executive director. As chief counsel and senior counsel to U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Alex led investigations, oversight, and legislative efforts to address special interest influence and judicial abuse of power. He is one of the great champions in the legal and messaging fight against dark money. Katie Chenoweth is a professor at Princeton University. Katie is trained as a scholar of early modern European culture, which comes in handy as medievalism is resurgent. Her current research and advocacy for women's rights have been profoundly shaped by her own experience as a single parent and domestic violence survivor. And her expertise in the Opus Dei right-wing Catholic web is vast. Celinda Lake is the only Democratic pollster to play a major role in defeating two incumbent presidents. She's a prominent pollster and political strategist for progressives who currently serves as president of Lake Research Partners. She's worked for a wide variety of candidates from AOC to Pelosi to Hillary Clinton, with a primary focus on women's concerns and women candidates. And Beth Schlachter is Senior Director of External Relations at MSI United States. an organization that works globally to end unsafe abortion and make contraception available to all who want it. She has worked in the women's health and rights sector for close to 20 years, including at the U.S. Department of State, where she led U.S. government policy on sexual and reproductive health and rights. Okay, so we have a lot of people here. They're really, they have a lot of deep knowledge in their fields. I'd like to start with Katie, but before I get to you, Katie, I just want to say we're going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then the last 15 minutes, we will address some of your questions. So please put your questions and thoughts into the chat, and we'll bring them up. So Katie, the opening graph of Project 2025 starts with some key Opus Dei terms. Could you tell us just a little bit about what that is, and then go further and give us a little bit of insight into Samuel Alito's Dobbs decision?
Yeah, well, I might even, if you don't mind, Nina, start us in Dobbs, because in Dobbs, believe it or not, we do need to go all the way back to the 12th century, and I think it's going to illustrate for us really well what's at stake in Project 2025 and the way that a highly conservative, ultra-conservative religious ideology is being smuggled in as if it were part of the American constitutional and legal tradition. So there's a really crazy footnote in the Dobbs decision. It didn't get a lot of attention. There was one story that shed some light on it, and we could hopefully post that in the chat for you. If you happen to have the Dobbs decision in front of you, it's footnote 25. And what's happening in this footnote is Justice Alito, as you may know, in overturning Roe v. Wade, is going to take to task the history and the historical work that was done in that decision and say that under common law, right, this precedent that is very important, it's not part of American law, but it is before. American law is inheriting a lot from it, is inspired by it. In Roe, the court said, under common law, abortion was not criminalized until quickening. In Dobbs, Alito, drawing on the work of conservative Catholic legal scholars, some of whom are affiliated with the Opus Dei movement that we'll be talking about in a second. Justice Alito is going to say, no, that history is wrong. Abortion has always been criminalized. And it's in the course of doing this that he has this really crazy and extremely misleading, dangerous footnote. So what happens in footnote 25? He's going through all these common law precedents saying abortion was illegal here, right, or it was criminalized here. And then he says, I'm just going to read it. Even before Bracton's time, so Bracton is this other important common law jurist, even before Bracton's time, English law imposed punishment for the killing of a fetus. And then he gives the citation, the Leges Henrici Primi, the laws of Henry I, and then he quotes it. He says, imposing penalty for any abortion and treating a woman who aborted a quick child as if she were a murderess. Right? So treating any woman who aborted a quick child as if she were a murderess. Now remember, what are we talking about here? We're talking about laws criminalizing abortion in Europe during the medieval and early modern period. If we say that the English law criminalized a woman who aborted her fetus as if she were a murderess, we're going to understand this to mean it was a criminal act, abortion was murder, and not only was abortion murder, because all the other examples, the vast majority that we see here, are when a woman is attacked, right? When a pregnant woman is assaulted. As we know, pregnancy is one of the most vulnerable times for women, when they do tend to be assaulted more, even today, right? Domestic violence rates and other violence rates increase, vulnerability increases. But this is about the woman who's pregnant, being treated as if she were, right? This word murderous. This was never criminalized under the English common law. Even in the 12th century, it was not. The text that Alito is quoting from here is talking about church law. And under church law, she is treated as if she were a murderess in the sense that she has to have the same church penalty, the same ecclesiastical penalty, which is 7 years of doing penance. If it had the same criminal penalty, she would have been put to death, right? And the article that hopefully is linked for you in the chat there goes on to show that it seems like this was a deliberate omission. If you're looking at the original text, even if you don't go to the Latin, even if you're just looking at the English translation that Alito is citing, you have to do some fancy footwork to make this seem like it's talking about criminal punishment. Why is Alito citing 12th century church law in a Supreme Court decision, right? Where it's not even common law. It's ecclesiastical law. It's the law of the church. You know, it wouldn't be the king doing this. It would be a priest or a bishop, right? A member of the clergy. Why? What is that doing here in the first place? Why is there this strange conflation that seems to be trying to pass off something that belongs to the Catholic Church of the 12th century as if it were a relevant precedent for what's happening in the United States in the 21st century? And why are we threatening women with being called murderesses and with, in this case, something like the death penalty, which would have been the punishment at the time for having an abortion, right? I read this as a veiled threat. I read this as also potentially a kind of dog whistle, especially when it's sort of nestled amongst lots of other contemporary legal interpretation from extremely conservative Catholic legal scholars, some of whom were involved in the creation of Project 2025. Some of whom, at least one of whom, who's cited immediately above this one, the footnote right above, has a member of the Heritage Foundation board who is also linked to the Opus Dei group. Okay, so let's turn to Project 2025, and I'll try and go fast. We're going to zoom into something like the present here. In the very first paragraph of the Project 2025 text, Kevin Roberts, who's the president of the Heritage Foundation, who, as has been publicly reported now, has ties to this Opus Dei group. And Opus Dei, as a book that just came out yesterday by the British journalist Gareth Gore, will tell you it is a religious movement, but it's above all a political project that's using religion as a tool and a mask and a cover to do reactionary political work, to roll back the sexual revolution, feminism, LGBT rights, gender equality, all kinds of other things. So how do you know that that's what's at stake in Project 2025? Well, Kevin Roberts is going to tell us from the very first paragraph, and I just want to underscore a few key terms that if you see them again, lights should start flashing. Okay, so in the last sentence of the first paragraph, Roberts is comparing the moment that we're in now to the late 1970s and the moment when Reagan was elected, when heritage also played a very important role in determining American policy in the executive branch. So he says, oh, the late 70s were a historical low point for America, and the political coalition dedicated to preserving, here's what he says, America's unique legacy of human flourishing and freedom. America's unique legacy of human flourishing and freedom. Human flourishing sounds like a really nice thing, right? You might say, what's wrong with human flourishing? Well, just to tell you quickly, it's part of a very specific philosophical, theological program that comes from Aristotle through Thomas Aquinas, another medieval Catholic philosopher. And what human flourishing entails is not just, oh, we want you to be happy. It's that every person, men, one thing, women, another, have a specific way of being, a specific end, and a specific function that is the correct, good, just way of being in order for them to flourish personally and in order for society to flourish as a whole. What's very clear in this worldview and in the Opus Dei worldview is that for women, what it means to flourish is to exercise your highest function as a wife and a mother. It's a hierarchical worldview where women serve men, they are subordinate to men, and their very being, right? This is the idea. You don't get to choose who you want to be, how you want to be. There is one way for you to be, right? This is a thinking of your essence from the moment you're born, or in fact, from the moment you're conceived. If you're a woman, right? If you have that chromosome, what it means is that you are meant and made to birth and to be a wife. And I think all of the more sort of disgusting and scandalous comments that JD Vance has made in public over the last few months show us what that looks like, that worldview, that that's what women are for and what they're meant to do. I want to give the floor over to the next person, but I do just want to quickly point you to another moment that's extremely revealing in the Project 2025 Forward by Kevin Roberts. It's really remarkable. Take a look at it. Again, if you've got the text in front of you, it's page 13. It's his fourth promise, right? Again, a kind of threatening promise as to what Project 2025 is going to deliver. And in this moment, not only does he tell us that America supposedly has a legacy of doing something that comes out of medieval Catholic philosophy, human flourishing, he rewrites the words of the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Thomas Jefferson tells us that these are our God-given rights. Kevin Roberts tells us, oh, how should we understand that term, pursuit of happiness? Well, really what Thomas Jefferson meant, he says, was pursuit of blessedness.
Mhm.
And if you know anything about Thomas Jefferson, you know that that is not what he meant, right? Thomas Jefferson is somebody who literally took scissors to his Bible and cut out all the parts he didn't like and made a new book out of it, right? All right, so why does this matter? I'm going to let other people talk about what this means in terms of policy. But in this worldview, women have what is also often in this world called a vocation, right? You are called by God. You are made to do one thing and be a certain way. And not only are you not flourishing if you're not doing it, it is also part of this worldview that your non-flourishing is called disordered. For example, you're not ordered toward the good. And anything that is not ordered toward the good is subject to penalty, and not just ecclesiastical penalty, criminalization, right? So not only abortion, but also contraception, all kinds of other things are legitimized by this worldview. So I'll stop there and hand it over.
Thank you so much for giving us. That is a perfect opening to have Alex talk to us about how this worldview is being promulgated through the courts. And Alex knows a lot about what you're talking about. He introduced us, in fact, I think. But Alex, why don't you tell us a little bit about the sort of disappearing legal framework for women's rights. And then I'd love it if you would address this little glimmer of hope that erupted in Georgia yesterday. I guess, well, last week, whenever it was.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Nina and the New Republic, for hosting this, for having me. What an honor to be here on this panel full of incredibly amazing, flourishing women, which must be making them go absolutely nuts over there. With this cribbed worldview and on the role of women in particular.
No, Leonard Leo is watching.
I'm sure he is. He's got minions everywhere. So, we started court accountability last year. You mentioned my background in the Senate. I was working as a Senate staffer during the Trump era, trying to stop this new breed of extremist judges that Leonard Leo at the Federalist Society, who has now amassed over $1 billion in dark money that he's funneling out through this dark money infrastructure to weaponize conservative ideas. Those are his words. And seeing these connections to this ideology, to this religious nationalist extremism that Katie is describing. Judges like Matthew Kacsmaryk, judges like Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, And then, I think, right there in the Judiciary Committee, I sort of witnessed some of the power politics and brazen abuse that this faction is willing to undertake against women, particularly in the context of the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation, where these two incredibly brave women had come forward with really credible allegations of sexual assault by the nominee that were really covered up and buried in a story that hasn't fully been, told. And here was a guy who, in a sort of mealy-mouthed way, acknowledged the importance of these precedents that protect women's freedoms and was, very much being installed to end abortion access in America, to overturn Roe versus Wade, which he was, very eager to do as part of that majority. And that he wasn't alone, right? Leo, who is, I think, becoming a subject of more scrutiny in recent years, has been active and influential for a very long time, involved in the selection of Clarence Thomas, very intimately involved in the selection of John Roberts and Sam Alito. I won't go back to medieval history, but I think, going back to Alito's own history as a Justice Department lawyer in the Reagan administration, when this so-called conservative legal movement was really starting to take shape and build power, Alito applied to his job under Ed Meese as a lawyer at the Justice Department by making clear his opposition to Roe versus Wade and his efforts to want to use originalism as a vehicle to do that. And we can see how that has manifested, as Katie so brilliantly broke down in that footnote and elsewhere. In terms of the threats that the courts pose and Project 2025, what we've seen is a huge overlap in funding and interest groups behind both of these efforts. A faction of Christian nationalist funders, a lot from the Catholic far right, but not exclusively, corporatist, anti-regulatory funders who really gave this movement its first surge of funding in the 70s after the infamous Powell memo. They're all there, behind both the court capture effort that the Federalist Society has been running and that came to fruition under Trump, and Project 2025. It's the same groups, it's the same agenda, and we see a lot of overlap in terms of the cases that these interest groups are bringing through special interest litigation, like the EMTALA case that Leo-funded state attorneys general brought up out of Idaho. The Supreme Court, didn't go all the way in allowing Idaho to enforce its abortion ban over the federal EMTALA law. But there you have, they also didn't close the door to it, very importantly. They very much left the door open for that to happen. And right there in Project
Can
2020.
you just explain the EMTALA very briefly?
Yeah, it's a federal law that requires women to have access to abortion care if necessary to in emergency situations to preserve their lives. And Idaho was trying to enforce its own restrictive abortion ban over those federal requirements. And Project 2025 is explicit, among other draconian restrictive anti-abortion measures, such as the elimination of access to mifepristone, which was another case that came up from the lower courts. Pregnancy and really more to the point, abortion surveillance and really related, very, very vulnerable data privacy issues. A lot of states don't have great data privacy protections. And if they're, put in power and try to put this, the Project 2025 agenda in place, I think it's very likely that the Supreme Court would be there for a lot of it. And then maybe one final point to make sure we hit home is this connection to Opus Dei and the idea of fetal personhood, which is a sort of a constitutional theory, sort of, propounded most recently and importantly by a close ally of Leonard Leo's, a professor at Princeton named Robert George, who has very close ties to Opus Dei, who this new book that Gareth Gore just released yesterday exposes as being financially connected to Opus Dei, despite George's previous denials of those connections, came up with this argument for the constitutionalization of fetal rights under the 14th Amendment. And at the same time as Donald Trump and J.D. Vance even are running away from the very toxic abortion politics that have taken hold of the Republican Party and that have been implemented in these red state agendas. What they're doing is, they're running away from the idea of a national abortion ban, saying they won't pass it. Meanwhile, they are trying to establish constitutional fetal personhood through the courts, which is the critical way that they have been able to advance so much of this agenda. Deeply unpopular ideas, getting rid of common sense regulations that keep our clean air and water, or protecting consumer welfare, or preventing antitrust enforcement. None of this stuff could be passed through the legislature, so the Republicans don't even try. They know that they can rely on the courts to stand in the way of progress and take us backwards through rewriting the Constitution, which I think raises some important questions that maybe we could get into about what we could do about this, given how far they have come in terms of securing these powers.
Thank you, Alex, for that primer on how they're taking over the courts. There was a ruling in Georgia a few days ago that actually looks like it could provide some kind of a basis for standing up against these state bans. Can you just explain what that was and what the potential of it is or is not? Will this judge be immediately overruled at some federal level?
Yeah, we'll see. I believe they've appealed it already, and this is a state Supreme Court decision or state court decision, really limiting the impact of Georgia's very restrictive anti-abortion laws, and doing so under the state constitution's analysis.
There's a lot of those,
Of course,
Max.
what the Dobbs decision did was it eradicated the fundamental federal constitutional right to abortion access. But state constitutions can be used to protect these rights at that level. And then I think what that leads to is a challenge ultimately that could very well reach the Supreme Court, where these questions of constitutional fetal personhood will be at issue. But it's a very heartening sign. And we've seen it also in the election context and elsewhere, where state courts are now one of the most critical and important safeguards for our rights and freedoms. And so, I'm sure this will be, hotly contested and, and challenged all the way up to the court, and we'll see how the court handles it. I think they recognize that the politics of this issue are incredibly fraught. In terms of the vibrancy and flourishing, to use that language again, of women, I think the court really underestimated the backlash that Dobbs would provoke. And as awful and tragic as the implications of that ruling have been, I think what we've seen is a incredibly heartening emergence of outrage and civic engagement from women, most notably, perhaps tied to why a lot of the actors behind this movement are interested in overturning the 19th Amendment and taking women's right to vote away. So Linda could get into what that would mean in terms of electoral outlook. Women are the kind of the core base of the pro-democracy majority, the pro-freedom majority in this country. And so I think that's sort of all that's going on in there in that situation.
You mentioned the importance of these state judges. It shouldn't be unremarked that Leonard Leo's using some of those billions to go after the state judges. And there's no doubt in my mind that they're going to go after that guy because I think his name is McBurney. He used some really interesting language that you don't usually see in judicial decisions in a red state, which I guess Georgia purplish red, where he says, women, this ban turns women into nothing but incubators, and basically states a right to bodily autonomy for women. So more power to him and to the right-thinking people in the state of Georgia. Let's move to Beth. Beth is very attuned to what's going on here and abroad because of the organization that she works with. And when we were talking earlier, you were telling us a little bit about how the former Trump administration anti-abortion zealots are actually out there busily beavering away in other countries, threatening them to get on board with this basically new medievalism that we're seeing here. Can you tell us a little bit about where those countries are, what's going on, and how this is part of a global, perhaps, surge, and what the pushback might be?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me give you a little background for why the US matters when it comes to sexual and reproductive health and rights internationally. We have a long history of policy riders attached to US foreign assistance and the annual appropriations every year that limit what our tax dollars can be spent on and that explicitly prohibit spending funding on abortion as a method of family planning, which we talk about US foreign assistance about family planning as opposed to contraception, which is how we talk about it domestically. But what these riders have meant is that those conservatives have been able to attach different policies over the decades to these policy riders to expand them. This started in the 80s under Ronald Reagan, who created a policy then known as the Mexico City policy, but it's widely referred to as the global gag rule, because Republicans, whenever they're in power, have attached this to US family planning assistance. And this policy says that if you accept US US family planning assistance, that you cannot take money or use your own money from anybody else to perform abortion or to refer for services or to advocate for abortion. Thus the term about gagging people, because you're not allowed to talk about it even if you're not using US foreign policy or US foreign assistance for that. So that has gone back and forth like a political football. It stayed in under Reagan and Bush. Clinton pulled it down on his first day. George W. Bush put it back in on his first day. Obama thought he'd be more diplomatic. He waited until day 2 to pull it down. Trump, of course, put it back in on day 1, but under Trump, it was expanded beyond the $600 million for family planning assistance to a new program that they called Protecting Life and Global Assistance. And earlier in a conversation, Katie mentioned the concept of protection coming from this Catholic background as well, of a need to protect women. And so they framed this new policy that they applied to all global health assistance, about $7 billion, in a framework of protection. So what Proj, and then of course, Biden pulled that down on day 1 as well and put it off to the side. But Project 2025 picks up this tradition and this protecting life and global health assistance, and it moves it from applying to $7 billion in global health assistance and attaches it to about $70 billion of all foreign policy assistance. And they propose that this would be a new anti-abortion framework that would be attached to every aspect of US foreign assistance.
Really
and that means that it would have to be embedded in
really,
multilateral
really
relationships
bad.
and even into bilateral relationships. So the idea that the State Department and USAID would become this vast bureaucracy of anti-abortion monitoring and policing really is beyond the scope of imagination. It's already difficult enough to provide information on how foreign assistance is appropriately applied, much less if you apply this whole new massive restriction. And this part of Project 2025 was actually written by 2 women, one named Valerie Huber, who under Trump was the Assistant Secretary for Global Health at HHS, and Alma Golden, who was the head of Global Health at USAID. And while they were in those positions and under the Trump administration, they put in place a whole framework that has that you referred to as, being pulled forward during the Biden administration. The first piece of this that's relevant started under Secretary Pompeo at the State Department, where he convened a commission, as he called it, on unalienable rights that was comprised of legal scholars, human rights scholars, theologians, who reviewed the US position on human rights. And their determination was that actually what they call unalienable rights, which they refer to as God's law, supersede human rights law, and that they posit that the US should be approaching our human rights frameworks with this in mind, and that God's law, as articulated by Katie, should be primary. And then they created, they used the trappings of state once again to create something they called the Geneva Consensus Declaration, which is an anti-abortion manifesto that they then put forward to a number of other governments in Geneva. They gave it the name of Geneva very deliberately because it makes it sound as if it's a human rights framework, because the Human Rights Council is located in Geneva. And at that time, 34 countries signed up to the Geneva Consensus Declaration. And again, what this said is that The right to life as defined by Christian nationalism is the primary right, and one that the group of signatories to this document would make their primary framework for their domestic and their international engagements. So that was about as far as they got when Trump lost, and they then moved out of government. But what you were referring to when you first introduced me, Nina, is that they didn't stop at that time. Valerie Huber created her own NGO called the Institute for Women's Health. And under the Institute of Women's Health, she created a policy framework for implementing the Geneva Consensus Declaration as a health program. And then she continued to shop this Protego program and the Geneva Consensus Declaration to other governments, including those signatories who remain to this day on the Geneva Consensus Declaration. And she was able to get 2 new signatories to the GCD. And she's gotten governments, including the government of Honduras and the government of Uganda, to sign up to this Protego framework. And she's been really effective at doing this, including through first ladies. It was Janet Museveni, the first lady of Uganda, who in May had a celebration of Uganda signing up for this Protego framework to pull forward the Geneva Consensus Declaration. And there's a lot of social media coming from Janet Museveni saying how proud she is to be the country to take this forward. And then just a couple of weeks ago, on the 4th anniversary of this declaration, the government of Burundi also signed up for Protego, and the First Lady of Burundi is also on social media celebrating Burundi's taking this forward as well. And so the way this has been shopped to others who hadn't yet signed on is to say, look, Trump is coming back. This was a little easier to sell before Kamala Harris became the candidate. But they were saying that Trump will come back, we will be back in power, and you can show your fealty to this worldview and to the Geneva Consensus Declaration now by adopting this Protego framework and showing that you continue to be with us. So these are governments who are very dependent on US foreign assistance. The government of Uganda, for example, is funded to the tune of about 70% from US foreign assistance. So they are playing both sides and signing up for Protego and continuing to depend on this kind of foreign assistance. And again, why this matters overall is when you consider all of the, we'll call it ODA, Overseas Development Assistance for sexual, maternal, reproductive healthcare, maternal healthcare, the US is responsible for about 65% of all of this funding globally. So our frameworks, our policy priorities matter profoundly to governments like Uganda that are regressive from their own worldview, who align naturally with what Valerie Huber and Project 2025 are proposing, but others who are moving forward and who have liberalized abortion law feel this pressure as well. And Project 2025 is not the only activist sort of effort that's out there. The Koch brothers and many others are also funding a global movement against reproductive rights. And we feel that locally as well. There have been threats to law in Kenya, where the Constitution protects the right to abortion. Organizations like mine have been taken to court because of this. So there's a lot that comes out of the US and a lot of ways that they work, some that are through the trappings of state and others that are through these religious or social networks as well, where they ironically say that it is those who are proposing that women can enjoy a healthy sexual life and should have access to contraception and safe abortion are the ones who are imposing colonial frameworks as if that idea is not a human concept, it's rather a one that comes from the West. So ironically, they use those sort of threats and fears of others, particularly when it comes to sexuality and LGBTQI and access to abortion, to push back on this as well. So we can expect, if Project 2025 is actualized, that it will overtake foreign policy in some way, particularly when it comes to US foreign assistance.
It's fascinating that these private citizens have enough funding behind them to be playing diplomat like that. And, you know, who's buying all those plane tickets and hotel, and that the Coke money is behind it. You know, Coke, drill baby, drill Cokes. Why are they so engaged in this? But anyway, I know you can't answer that. Maybe our next, maybe Celinda can talk a little bit about it. That's fascinating, Beth. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I just want to get to Celinda because we are facing the election coming up, and we have a gendered election, at least as gendered as 2016. Just want to talk to you about what you're finding in terms of expectations about whether women are going to save us. I have people come up and say that to me when I'm talking about the election. Well, women are going to save us. They're going to come out of the woodwork and vote. And then a little bit about the danger zone that Trump's messaging is how he's trying to get at least a small sliver of the female vote. Have at it. Tell us what you're finding.
Well, thank you. And it's really a privilege and a pleasure. And thank you, Nina, for your leadership and thought leadership. And this panel has been very, very informative to me and made me even more anxious than I was before I came. So I'm going to keep my remarks short because I got to get back to the election, as does everyone on this call. It is up to the women, and the election is very gendered. We will have a gender gap as big as we did in 2016, which was a record, or maybe even larger. The gender gap, the difference between men and women, closed a little bit with Biden, and it is now quite wide with Harris. And the formula for success is for us to win women by more than we lose men. That is really the formula in all of the close races. Women will make a difference in terms of turnout. And we have seen, since Harris was nominated, record registration in states where there are abortion initiatives. There are record registrations. There's been a very profound effect since Dobbs, which is that most states in the country have gotten about 10% more pro-choice or pro-abortion. And that includes at the individual state level as well as the national level. And 2/3 of Americans do not want state by state laws. That is an attempt that they're making. This is going to leave it up to the states to decide. And young women in particular are saying, I'm going to choose my state for college. I'm going to choose my state for employers, depending on what state you're in, because I'm not going to go through this. I'm not going to risk my life. And, there are as Tim Walz said last night, if one of the examples he gave, if that woman had been in Minnesota, she might be alive today, which is just horrifying to think of that. So women are registering and turning out in record numbers. In terms of we also find that one of the keys is to keep women from voting the same way as their husbands. So the younger women, the women of color, the unmarried women are very, very strongly for Harris, and it's just a question of getting them out to vote. The married women, white women, older women are very much in the swing audience, and one of the things that's really important is to keep them from voting the same way as their husbands. And this was a big factor in 2016 as well. There were huge independent expenditures geared toward that. And there are three kinds of components to that messaging. One is to tell women empower them, to tell them they have their own way of doing things. They have their own ideas. They take a 360-degree view. Second is to remind them that their vote is private and no one knows how they voted, and they don't have to share with anyone how they voted. And the third is to tell them that they are a role model for their daughters and granddaughters, that they are voting for their family. Sadly, women do not like voting for themselves. They like voting for others, but they are very adamant right now about voting for their families, and they feel a real responsibility to vote for their daughters and their granddaughters. Vote by mail actually works against women ticket splitting from their husbands, because people tend to sit down together and vote, and the husband will look over and say, we're not Hillary voters, we're Trump voters. And she thinks, oh God, I'm not going to argue. Okay. So it's very important to tell women to vote on their own. And vote by mail also accentuates the deference to men. Women think men have more information, and I'm sure we've all encountered this I know in polling, when we have reached out to women, and women have said, well, you should really talk to my husband. He knows more about politics than I do. We say, no, no, no. What we want is your opinion, not his opinion. But the vote by mail and sitting down together accentuates that dynamic. The other thing that's very important is that in a number of states we're going to have abortion initiatives. And so far, the abortion initiatives have been successful everywhere. They look in very good shape. The one that is questionable is Florida, only because it needs 60%. They had to change the rules to try to beat the initiative. We'll definitely have a majority support. Whether we get all the way over 60 is a different question, although this race closing. And I want to leave as the last thought, there's so much bad polling out there. And when a pollster tells you there's a lot of bad polling, you know there's a lot of bad polling. But we have these crazy questions that say, well, it's all the economy and abortion isn't mattering anymore. Well, one, women have the ability to worry about lots of things at once. We're great multitaskers and great multi-worriers. And secondly, what's really interesting about the abortion issue is it tends to be a really clear choice between the candidates. Who knows whose plan on inflation is even going to happen, will make a difference, and who can tell the difference. But on abortion, particularly in states where there's an initiative, it's like, I've decided I'm voting for this initiative. I just want to know yes or no. Where's your vote? And so the initiatives can really help accentuate the impact and bring out women voters who prefer voting sometimes on the issues than for candidates that they may see as flawed. So this debate is going to be spoken to loudly by the voters. And it was pretty scary what I heard about the trends, the policies, the judicial traditions, and the international, because it is so out of step with where the public is right now. So Nina, I'll turn it back to you, and glad to engage in this more in questions. Oh, and Nina, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You're on mute.
I was coughing and I had turned it off. I have a quick follow-up for you, Celinda. When we were talking earlier, you mentioned, the Trump reach out to women, which is it's a laughable concept, but it's not something to ignore. Tell us a little bit about this, the instilling fear, protection, what you call the protection norm that he's pulling.
Yes.
How
And
effective
so,
might that be?
yeah, so he has had a lot of strategies. Many of them have largely failed, in fact, in part because he gets in the way of them, and in part because his vice presidential candidate gets in the way of them, although he was really under control last night. And we saw yet another version of J.D. Vance. But this protection norm and this protection emotion is very serious, particularly for older women and blue-collar women. They want, even more than opportunity, they want security and stability. They're worried about crime. They're worried about immigration. They're worried about the economy. And when we've asked the question, there's kind of misogyny and hostile sexism, which about 28% of the public subscribes to. That's sobering enough. But then there's what we would call benign sexism, which isn't that benign. And we test it by talking about women being cherished and protected. A protected word, very strong. We have 2/3 of women who say, I agree that women should be cherished and protected. So that has a lot more resonance than we might think. And then as he did in 2020, he's trying to invoke this fear with horrible, horrible accusations and things like saying, as you heard most recently, we're going to have a day of violence and get rid of crime. We're going to, undocumented people, or he calls them illegal immigrants, will come in your kitchen door and slit your throat. Very, very graphic images that can be very, very scary to women. I hope that women will see through this, but it can be very appealing. And I hope that we all consider it immoral to set a context of lies that requires kindergarteners to be evacuated from their schools 3 days in a week. That is, in my opinion, a mortal sin. And I don't know what part of the Bible, Katie, you can invoke for that.
Well, you and I have talked about this before, but I mean, he's messaging in tandem with Fox, which if you're sitting there with your husband and he's got Fox on because he wants to watch football. That was the genius of Murdoch, right? To get football on.
Right.
And that's running in your house 24/7. even with the sound down, what they do every night is they get a piece of video from somebody acting up in the subway or somebody looting in LA, and they run it 24/7 in the corner of the screen. I mean, so it's really the messaging has always been in tandem with Fox, and that's the sort of the picnic blanket is set or the table is set or whatever for this kind of. Then I'm stepping in to protect you.
Totally.
I want to see if we've got questions. I see somebody asking about the Louis DeJoy slow walking the mail thing, but I'm not sure anybody here. I mean, maybe Celinda, you know something about this. I've been paying some attention to it, but are you concerned at all that there's this, little Trump elf that's still in there?
Well, I'm concerned about any of the ways in which they're trying to rig and manipulate the system. Concerned about that, even more concerned about, 270,000 voters purged in one state and counting, the interference with the vote, the threat of violence. A lot of women say, I don't want to get involved in this. I gotta focus. A lot of Latinas say, I gotta focus on taking care of my family. I don't want to get involved in this. So I'm very worried about the whole picture. And I think it's not just one thing. I mean, they, fire on all cylinders, and they're very comprehensive and thorough in their approach. And frankly, this conversation just reminded me about how thorough they are. So yes, we should be very concerned about all of it.
Mhm.
Just one more note on that, just to jump on what Celinda said. I mean, I think one big contextual difference we're seeing, not specific to DeJoy, but is the real maturation and investment by this same Project 2025 court capture network in fabricated challenges to election integrity.
Exactly.
They're way farther ahead than they were last time when, it was at the last minute, a few fringe actors, John Clark, it's Jeff Clark and John Eastman, who were sort of, trying to do this too little, too late effort to steal the election through the courts. This time around, we've got a really, really mature, well-funded effort that's going to be bringing these election interference challenges to voting procedures, challenges to drop boxes, challenges to, made up lies about non-citizen voting, with a mind to getting these cases to the court. And so I think this broadening public understanding of kind of who now controls the power in the courts and just how illegitimately it's being wielded is critical if we're in a one of these nightmare scenarios where we could have a Bush v. Gore on steroids. And I think that the main and most important way we prevent that is, real civic engagement, real participation.
And Alex, if I could say, just to add on to your thought, and you're more of an expert in this than I am, the way they've it used to be that electors were kind of faceless bureaucrats. They have infiltrated the electors, and the ability to delay the certification. And voters are like, we want you to pledge to certify. We don't want our votes vetoed. And that is also very concerning. And people had no idea that they even had electors, whether they're voted or appointed, and who's going to protect my vote. Is a very big issue as well.
Yeah. Oh, you want to, Katie, weigh in?
Well, something that I keep thinking as I'm listening to all of these amazing contributions from all of you is, and it can risk sounding conspiratorial when we talk about, oh, there's this, small, relatively small, they have a lot of reach, but a relatively small group of people. But, as Beth is talking, you're talking about the Commission on Unalienable Rights. I mean, it's really the same crowd. It's the same, my same colleague who's on the board of the Heritage Foundation and who's got that footnote in Dobbs and who's partnered with Leo in a lot of these court operations, right? He was, the brains behind that operation as well, as has been reported. But the encouragement, I think, to take from that is, they're both invoking divine law and having to be so strategic over such a long period because the public is not on their side, as you were saying, Celinda, right? They have to be taking anti-democratic measures because they don't have democracy working in their favor, right? Which is scary, but it also, I think, is a real resource and also a source of optimism.
Well, it's a source of optimism, but I mean, I with Alex on the absolute emergency of this legal debacle that they're cooking up. In my view, that and you have to be hearing about this in Washington, Celinda. What I don't understand is why does the Democratic Party not have a czar, like an election czar right now? And a whole team, and maybe they do, I don't know, because you're more in touch with what's going on with the Democrats. But the focus on, yes, get out the vote, all those women starting, coming out of the woodwork and their allies coming to vote, that isn't going to save us if they pick a couple of precincts in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and take it up to either the House or the High Court. So that's, I don't know where's
So there is
where's
unprecedented.
the emergency, where's the ambulance?
Yeah. So here's a dilemma, I think. There is unprecedented, and I'm not totally aware of everything. There is unprecedented legal teams that have been put together and deployed and trained and are ready. And partnerships with other organizations like, NAACP, where, we have tested, for example, messages. If anybody even looks at you strange, you have a lawyer, go get your lawyer, go to the NAACP person and have them protect your vote. So that is out there. There's a kind of balancing act because you worry about demobilizing people if you advertise this too much. Because right now, there is going to be a Trump surge. We need a Harris surge. These are very peripheral voters with low information. And if they feel they have to barrel through violence and interference and be questioned and stand in line for 6 hours and then find a lawyer someplace, they might just decide, hell with it, I'm not voting. The system's rigged already. I never trusted it to begin with. So that's the balancing act. I think that's why you don't see that advertised as much. Doesn't mean there can't be more done. Doesn't mean we don't need a lot of citizens involved too. But I think that's what you have as a balancing act. What is mobilizing and what is demobilizing?
We got a good sort of final question here from someone. I don't know who wants to pick it up. Maybe you can all kind of weigh in. What do you think is the end game for the ultra-conservative Catholics and others if they were able to have their wish list granted? And this person says, I can't figure it out. What is the end game? What does it look like? Katie, are we just going to have?
Well, I'm going to say for one example of what it looks like, I wish I had the link to give you, but look at the news coming out of Argentina right now and criminal charges that have just in the last few days been brought against Opus Dei as an organization for what amounts to the servitude, but the trafficking and also the exploitation and servitude of young women who are told, here's this word again, it's their vocation to work 12 to 15-hour days with no breaks, with no pay for years on end, doing the domestic labor and service for the men who are in charge of the organization. Right? This is real. It has happened. It's already happened in France. It's happened in the UK. There are court cases. There's reporting. It's happening right now in Argentina. Gareth lays it out in his book that Nina did such an excellent piece on in New York Magazine. So, it's not dystopian. It's in fact already been happening as a kind of test for, what would this look like on a larger scale? So rolling back not only gender equality, but all kinds of rights and the most basic freedoms.
I can add to that, Nina. I'll tell you what women voters think the end game is. They think the end game is control. The end game is taking away your rights and your freedoms and taking away equality. That's what, and being barefoot and pregnant. And that's what women volunteer constantly, their language, not mine.
Beth, quickly, you've seen this, these other countries and what's going on with the subjugation of women as
Exactly.
as a foundation for autocracy. Can you say anything about that?
My answer was going to be this is about power. This is about people who have power and don't want to give it up. And one of the ways that you do that is through social means and control and the subjugation of women. For us, this is life and death. If women are dying because they're getting pregnant or they want it, they have an abortion and it's unsafe because safe abortion isn't available to them, then that leads to, families remaining in poverty. It means communities can't grow. All these investments in social systems to try to support countries to move forward are all destabilized by access to abortion. And so a lot of this is about just controlling people, and it's just raw power. And it's a very effective way because it seems natural that people are a little skittish or concerned about the sexualization of children or sexuality and homosexuality and these heteronormative frameworks feel like the natural order. And so we don't question when communities pull back a little bit. A lot of this is stoked. It's deliberately used to keep people where they are so those in power can keep their hands on it. Pure and simple.
Thank you for that very succinct rounding up of what we've been talking about. It is now 5 o'clock. We've made it to the hour. You're a wonderful panel. Thank you so, so much, each of you, for coming on. And we can do it again later sometime. But go forth and keep doing the good work that you've been doing, all of you. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Nina.
Thank you, Nina.
That's a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Wow. That was really interesting. I don't even, I learned so much from the biblical history and the way that the Christian nationalists slash open, radical Catholic, whatever, however you want to group them, and using religion as a tool to control people, whether or not they're true believers or not. But just hearing what is steeped in and what Alito and others are putting into actual court documents is mind blowing. And I'm just blown away by all the speakers. I will link a number of things in the description of the video a little bit later on. And also, I did drop the link for the direct court listener document of Jack's current filing, and I had before this pulled it up. So maybe I don't know. Maybe I'll just hold on that until we have smart people reading it too. So I don't just kind of waste everybody's time reading things that are already being analyzed and beautifully summarized for people. So we'll build on that. We'll talk about it tomorrow morning and utilize all the great information of smart, fast reading people that read it. And we can talk about what we know and what we learn and go from there. But what a great program. This is a good broadcast to share with people if they didn't see it, or they'll have the link. Yeah, I'm sure it is. They'll have the link in the description to the recording of this, so I'll make sure that that's in there so that people don't have to watch our broadcast. They could just go directly to the event recording itself. So I'll make sure that that's in there. And I don't know if Jim is doing a space tonight. He may or may not be, but that might happen. And if not, I guess I'll just see you tomorrow morning. So there you go. That's all there is. So thanks again for coming, and I will see you all very soon.